My skepticism and wait-and-see attitude towards the AMD Ryzen has paid off. The Ryzen is out and about, people are chiming in on it, and I'm about to join those people. This is Multimedia J Radio Style for Saturday, March 4th, 2017. Let's start the show.
Multimedia J Radio Style.
Multimedia J Radio Style begins in 3, 2, 1.
Let me tell you something, folks. Like any human being, I love when I'm right. Ryzen Mania swept everywhere, and the hype train was like, woo, woo. And folks gave me a hard time because I was like, hold on a second. Wait and see. Let's see what AMD can do with this thing. And we're actually, in a way, we're still waiting and seeing what AMD can do with this thing, but Ryzen is finally out and about. You know, barely a month and a half ago, maybe, I was making fun of speculators who, on a slow news day, would make another Ryzen video like, well, I think it's going to be this, I think it's going to be that, I think it's going to... But they didn't actually tell you anything concrete because there was nothing concrete to tell you. And so I was like, oh my goodness, you're running the Ryzen hype right into the ground just for cheap views and listens and podcast downloads, and shut up already and just let them release the thing. And of course, AMD was very, very zip-lipped about any details at all because, you know, if they don't want false positives, they don't want folks getting all worked up for nothing, they wanted this to be right. Well, they got it right. It was a hard launch, March 2nd, like they planned. It's out in the wild, and Ryzen is even showing up on some benchmarks for independent benchmark programs like Nova Bench and User Benchmark. Although User Benchmark is actually where I've seen the most Ryzen benchmarks so far. Nova Bench only has a single person with a 1700X or something like that, just a couple of 1700Xs and things along those lines. However, User Benchmark, that downloadable program that kind of sort of does what Nova Bench does, except it has a website running it instead of download this Windows program and run it and blah, blah, blah. You know, there's 28 benchmarks on here, and I'm looking at for the Ryzen 1700. That was the processor that I was going to get if I wanted to convert to Ryzen in this generation of Ryzen chips. I've decided not to. I'm going to look at possibly going Ryzen with the successor to the Ryzen 7 1700 because it looks like I would be trading one type of performance for another and perhaps a little bit more power efficiency if I changed processors. That does not quite justify the price tag associated with swapping out the guts of the system less than a year after I built it. So I will remain Skylake for the foreseeable future for everything on Monolith for the time being. The best way to describe the AMD Ryzen as it exists currently in the wild is that classic soap opera drama-inducing Facebook relationship status. It's complicated. Tell that to your gossipy friends who can't stand technology, because you know what? I never thought I'd see the day when that would be how I would describe what the situation is with a processor, especially a high-end processor like what the Ryzen is supposed to be. It's complicated. There's a lot of things that we have to make adjustments for. Number one, AMD's climbing back into the ring. This is their first competent product that Intel didn't sneeze all over in many, many years. So come on, folks, let them actually build themselves back up. I mean, remember when the Pentium 4 first came out? And AMD had just challenged Intel because they had beaten them to 1 gigahertz with the Athlon. When the Pentium 4s first came out, the original generation Pentium 4s at the beginning of this millennium were actually slower than Pentium 3s at certain mathematical tasks. That was kind of the one embarrassing tech news article that I remember from that far back. Pentium 4 is slower than Pentium 3. And the media jumped all over it. But, as we've seen since then, Intel got their stuff together. Heck, even at the end of the Pentium 4 days, those things are running so hot the hottest single cores out there, the era of the space heater computers, basically. Those things are running so hot that the ATX standard for towers had to be modified. TAC, thermally advanced chassis, the introduction of side fans to computers because of how hot those things were. And it's not like AMD had chips that ran cool as ice either. That's one of the big reasons why I am never going to build a nostalgia computer that's supposed to be like the original Silver Bullet all over again, because the original Silver Bullet was an AMD Athlon XP 2000 that cooked at 55 Celsius idle. If it was a cold day out, it might go down as low as 45. I have to run Monolith full blast to clear 50C these days. And I didn't have as much practice with Arctic Silver and these coolers when I built Monolith as much as I did when I rebuilt Tuxedo with the new motherboard. So I have a feeling if I redid the heatsink compound in that thing, it would run even cooler. But Intel, for some strange reason, has processors that get hot and cold really quickly. So I can be sitting at like 20 degrees and then boom, it cranks way up to 50 if I start doing a ton of stuff, and then it drops back down very, very quickly, as opposed to the more slow rising and falling of what the Phenom 2 does in Tuxedo. I don't know, but we're not here to talk about any of those chips. We're here to talk about the Ryzen. The Ryzen is out in the wild. It is AMD's basically attempt to climb back into the ring, and it's getting mixed results. It's also getting some bad press that makes zero sense whatsoever and looks totally like FUD, clickbait, attempting to get people to read your article by saying, look, the Ryzen's not as good as we thought it was. And that is why the only article that I am going to link to in the links in the description is going to be from Forbes. Rush to Judgment casts AMD Ryzen in critical light, because that is exactly what has happened. To make a long story short, AMD has released a moose of a multi-core chip in the Ryzen. The problem is, it is too much of a multi-core moose. Once you get down to quad-core and below, Intel takes over in terms of the dominant processor at this point. And in gaming right now, the Ryzen can sometimes represent a 30 to 40% drop in performance because everything's been so programmed for the cores all these years. Core I this, Core I that. But the thing is, depending on the bias of the reporter or what their background is or how closely they follow technology, if at all, the pendulum swings wildly as to whether we should be cheering on the Ryzen or telling AMD to put its company up for sale. It's just that, I can't believe it. Whatever happened to just saying, hey, the Ryzen's out. Here's how it does. How come so many of these journalists have to try and interject their opinions into what's supposed to be objective journalism? You'll hear all kinds of opinions on it, but it's mostly the FUD that I'm concerned about, because the FUD is what makes people look so freaking stupid. Like I said, with my skepticism regarding Ryzen Mania, what was the prevailing internet, quote-unquote, wisdom when it came to PC gaming up until the Ryzen hype train took off? You don't need a powerful processor to game. There's the Greenham crew, there's the Sandy Bridge gamers, there's all kinds of people out there that are making chips, even 5-plus-year-old processors, play today's games at 1080-60 with a good graphics card. But all of that went completely out the door in both directions with the Ryzen launch. You don't need a powerful processor to game. Oh, look, the AMD Ryzen's a powerful processor. I want to play video games with it. Oh, crap, the AMD Ryzen's better at workstation tasks than gaming. Do you see where I'm coming from here? As usual, for the sake of more people might read this if we throw a fit about it, it's just, look at how stupid people have made themselves look with all of this. Instead of just, do you want a Ryzen or not? Seriously, look at the benchmarks and look at the games that you play. Is it really going to kill you to move over to a Ryzen from a Core i7? One bar chart that I was looking at earlier showed a game running at 1080, all maxed out. The Core i7 Kaby Lake running 7700K ran at like 130 frames per second. The Ryzen ran at 115. If you have a 60 hertz display, why does that even matter? If all you want is 60 frames a second, why does that even matter? It's not the end of the world. Oh, and by the way, how about we do the forest trees thing here and acknowledge the Ryzen is breaking up. It's basically, well, for those Trump lovers out there, the Ryzen is draining the swamp. With what Intel has done to the processor world over the last couple of years, with their dominance for so long. How many jokes have there been about Intel can't count past 4? How long has quad-core been a mainstream standard for a decent machine? And dual-core tries to be quad-core nowadays. How come we can't move beyond that into more multi-core type stuff, like what the 8-core Ryzen or even the FX series could have been good with, and in some cases was good with? Do people really think that this is going to stay around forever? Do people really think, we've got quad-core phones out there now. We've got quad-core phones, and we have quad-core tablets. The quad-core era isn't going to last forever, folks. So, now that something beyond quad-core is out there, and it's competent, even if it's not beating Intel at its turf of up to quad-core, can't count past 4, now that something decent is out there, and by the way, Intel considers Ryzen serious enough competition that they're already price dropping all of their stuff. Yeehaw! First time I've ever seen for those of you lucky bastards with Micro Centers, it's the first time I've ever seen an i7 Skylake for under 300. They had some on there for 260, but the rest of the internet is kind of floating around the 300 mark. I thought I was getting a good deal last summer when this chip was on sale for 320 during back to school season. I was like, yeah, let's do a lot with the CPU this go round and have it last for years and years and years through several graphics card upgrades until finally it starts choking on the games that I'm playing and I finally go get something else. One of those deals. It's exactly what happened with the Phenom 2, by the way. I had a hard time justifying putting that thing out to pasture. But no matter how much the FUD crowd may try to do what they're doing with the Ryzen, the fact remains time marches on. Maybe right now it's not really worth it to get a Ryzen if you already have a decent core machine from the last few years. But let's check back in a couple of years. Of course, AMD fanboys can always go out and build their all AMD systems now to give them some sales for the time being. But folks, things are not going to stay 4-core forever. It's not going to stay 4-core focused forever. I mean, if more cores can actually do some decent stuff and things are coded for it, or an update to Windows 10 helps with that sort of thing in terms of spreading what the processor does, spreading the workload and things along those lines, then yeah, it's a new world. I actually think that AMD could be the tail that wags the dog once again if this processor family succeeds in getting Intel to shut down all the nonsense they've been doing, not only with pricing, but with just how fragmented their SKU catalog is. At the very least, I would like to see all Intel processors become overclockable and the K non-K designation completely go away. In the meantime, though, let's look at these user benchmarks numbers, and let's look at just how horrible this difference is. So, the i7 Kaby Lake, not even, the Skylake, what I have right now, the 6700K from about 2 years ago-ish when it came out. The percents are gaming 93, nuclear submarine, desktop 94, nuclear submarine, workstation 69, battle cruiser. The Ryzen 1700, which would send me down to a 65-watt TDP system, although that TDP can be a flaky measurement of power efficiency sometimes. Here's the difference, this horrible difference. And don't forget, these two are around the same price range. They're floating either above or below the $300 mark. Gaming, 85. Desktop, 83. Workstation, 93. That's the multi-core moose. That is the Ryzen 8-core 16-thread, and it is blowing away the 4-core 8-thread, obviously, because it's closer to a proper server chip, which is the ultimate head-scratcher and why I'm saying it's complicated when it comes to the whole situation with the Ryzen. If this thing is so incredible at number crunching, as opposed to desktop and gaming, why the heck isn't AMD writing drivers to have it work with Windows 7 so they can sell these things to more business users? It's right there. This thing is a multi-core moose. Windows 7 doesn't go end of support until 2020. The AMD Ryzen is supposed to be around, the family anyways, is supposed to be around until 2020. Put them together. if AMD wants to stop supporting Windows 7 next go round, they can. But they're losing customers if the Ryzen doesn't officially support it. If this thing is such a mathematical moose of a chip, sell it to businesses. Stop with this, oh, we're not going to bother at Windows 7. Let's optimize for the new stuff. There are some companies out there that are going to run Windows 7 completely into the ground, and they're going to buy probably Skylake's ad infinitum because Kaby Lake drops Windows 7 support. So I'm thinking the Skylake might stick around for a while. I really don't think that kind of artificial obsolescence is the sort of thing that Intel would want to lose sales over. But there are corporate IT departments out there that are going to absolutely run Windows 7 completely and totally into the ground. If the Ryzen is better at workstation stuff than gaming, even though the folks at AMD are already talking, oh, we'll just patch it. Oh boy, wait for the patch applying to hardware. But if this is so good at number crunching and it's like one step below just buying a darn server, why wouldn't they want to sell it to businesses or enthusiast businesses or folks doing drafting or something like that need a high number crunching desktop for that sort of thing? This thing is a monster at workstation tasks. And yet our merry band of fudsters in the media are like, oh my goodness, this thing's gaming performance is weak. Even though not too long ago, folks, we don't need a powerful processor to game. You're a moron if you put a lot of money into your CPU as opposed to your GPU. And then they wonder why they're doing guts upgrades every 2 to 3 years because they don't need a powerful processor to game, as opposed to emphasize the processor to get started and then do graphics card upgrades for several generations on that motherboard. But that's a completely different discussion here. It just makes no sense. It's just the media trying to get you to read their article and get all emotionally wrapped up in things, when in reality, look at some real-world numbers. Look at some 1080p or 1440p or whatever benchmarks for the games you play, and take it for what it is with your current setup, understanding that do you go for 1080-30? Do you go for 1080-60? Do you go for 4K 30 or 60? What exactly do you want to get, and does it do it? Because I'll tell you one thing, statistics, percentages, numbers can be used to make things look better or worse than they actually are. Putting the context back in is how you get around all of that, which is precisely why this was something that came up in one of those tacky cartoons that I made earlier. This is also why that you should not formulate your opinions and whatnot exclusively off of reviews. That you should be like, if it were me, and I was using my setup with the stuff that I want, would I get what I want by buying this device? And it's a yes-no question. It's not a matter of bragging to your friends that if you turn off the power save features on your system, you can get 15% more of a score in NovaBench than them, or even Cinebench or any of these benchmark programs. It's not a matter of that. It's a matter of basically, will this do what you want it to do? And quite frankly, the media, what they want to do is get you to read and get all emotionally wrapped up in things and come back later. So some of what's going on, it's the media being the media. Quite frankly, though, we need the competition. We're already seeing the about face that Intel has done with their prices. I imagine chip design and the complexity of their SKU catalog will be the next thing they clean up. If they do that, then once again, AMD is the tail that wags the dog, and that is why those of us who support AMD continue to support AMD, no matter how bad things get. Because forget monopolies. Monopolists are a problem too. And I'm not talking about one company running the industry. I'm talking about an industry with so little competition that the remaining players can act like they're the only company in business. We see enough of that with internet service and telecommunications here in the US, and quite frankly, enough with the industry consolidation. Competition is what makes capitalism work. Don't believe me? Look at history with state-sponsored monopolies in any form, whether under communists, mercantilists, the works. Competition is good. Competition works. And quite frankly, to oppose it at this point means you are more than welcome with rubber stamping consumers getting ripped off en masse by a company that needed a fire lit under its ass for the last several years. Thanks for listening, everybody. This is Multimedia J, signing off. Thanks for stopping by.